It's the 4th of December 2023, 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, Southwark Crown Court, London. On the pavement outside, we see a line of people, each person with the same placard. It reads, "Jurors have an absolute right to acquit a defendant according to their conscience," meaning the conscience of the juror, that is. Now, this principle goes back 350 years to 1670. It's remembered by this plaque hanging on a wall in the Old Bailey. Religious laws at the time forbade the conversion from the Church of England to another religion, and 2 Quakers were on trial for trying to do that. The jury found them innocent. The judge had the jury locked up without food or water until they reconsidered their verdict to come back with a guilty on all charges verdict. But eventually a higher court judge released them and came up with the reasoning that we see on these placards today. Now, you'd think that legal traditions would be respected by the justice system, but you'd be wrong. The lady in front here with white hair is Trudy Warner. She's a retired social worker. In March 2023, she sat in the public gallery of Inner London Crown Court, where friends of hers were on trial for their climate activism. Trudy thought the judge was extremely unfair in trying to manipulate the jury against the defendants. So the next day she wrote the placard that we saw earlier and stood outside the court on the pavement holding it. Somebody told the judge told the police to arrest her for contempt of court. She was arrested and held in the court cells until the end of the day. The case got bigger. It was transferred to a higher court at the Old Bailey. Remember the plaque hanging there? The case ended up with the Attorney General at cabinet level. Right now, she's been told that she might be charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. And that's how and why the campaign Defend Our Juries started in September 23. To establish the right of defendants to explain their motivations to their jury. That might sound separate to the right of juries to decide their verdict, but it's only by explaining the context of an event that a jury is able to know the full facts of a case and to decide a verdict on the wider morality of a situation. Well, since September 23, there have been many vigils outside Crown Courts all over the UK. But that hasn't stopped some judges from trying to manipulate jurors. At Isleworth Court in October, Judge Edmonds banned a defendant from explaining why she did what she did. He threatened to move to trial without a jury. He directed the jury that she had no defence in law. And he prohibited her from telling the jury that they have an absolute right to acquit. On the 12th of December 23, another 2 climate activists were on trial again at Isleworth Crown Court. Another all-day vigil was held.
I prefer the other one to the
There you go.
Yes,
That's the one that's in front of you.
all right, jolly good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay.
Are you feeling any better?
So 1, 2, and 1 by the
It was
lamppost.
really bad on Sunday. I just
On the far wall then.
On the far wall.
I get that.
I've got autoimmune stuff, and it might be that, but
Shall I stay where I am?
I think it's the same. I know
No.
it's too much.
Nearer.
Yeah.
Too much.
Take some time out without the clothes.
Yeah. Where do you want the standers?
1 on the corner.
Where are you going, James?
I'm going to sit, that's all right.
Yeah.
See where he puts me, look out, I sit.
Because within the climate movement, there's a kind of accepted fact that until people emotionally connect with what is happening, it's impossible to take action or to become really proactive about fighting against it. And in human behaviour, it's very interesting how we need to see a problem in order to act. So if we see a child in the road and we see a car driving towards us at great speed, we'll run in the road and we'll rescue that child. Right. So what does it take? I don't have a problem understanding. I've made that leap. I don't know what it... Actually, I think I do know what triggered me, and I'll come back to the word justice. Injustice. I had a situation in my own family where I had an experience of great injustice, and it made me extremely angry and extremely distressed and extremely upset. And it didn't take much then for me to move that emotion into the climate space. And the climate crisis is probably the biggest injustice that, if it exists. We've got the people right now suffering from it who did nothing or virtually nothing to create it. And I think my sense of injustice, and injustice causes anger, and anger can be a really big motivator to take action. Right. So I was very angry, and I used the anger that had been triggered within my own sort of family environment, sense of injustice, to somewhere else. Yeah.
Because as I heard Silas Reed saying at one trial, you're tugging the heartstrings of the jury by talking about your motivations, and he didn't want that, as I remember. He didn't want that. They just want it to be decided on the law. But the trouble is, these lawyers have a very pure view of the law, but they don't think that the law has been devised by people in Parliament who are often paid by vested interests. Their campaigns are, the Tory party last year took £3.5 million from climate deniers, polluting industries and fossil fuel companies. So they are being influenced by vested interests to make laws in vested interest favour, and that's what we think's been happening with the Police Crime and Sentencing Act and the new Public Order Act. The Conservatives are taking donations from these vested interests, which is influencing the laws that they write. So when a judge says, who's a lawyer and takes a very pure view, we live in a democracy. That's another of the things they say. We live in a functional democracy. How much of it is a democracy when people who make laws are being financed by vested interests, and there's a revolving door between regulators and that's right. So they work in the government, and then they go and work for a vested interest, and then they come back to the government again. So it's.
And you were actually in the court when Judge Reed was trying to intimidate the jury.
I wouldn't say intimidate. When he was expressing a very purist view about the law and about what defendants can say, and the judges say things like, that's right, there's no legal defence here, there's no defence in law. And it's actually very clever to say that, because a jury might think from that, wait a minute, if I acquit, I'm breaking the law. There's no defence in law. But, they're not telling them that, and I realised this, sitting in the public gallery, I realised that early on at the first trial, my goodness, that jury can make whatever decision it wants, and despite all the huff and puff by the judge, they can make whatever decision they want, and there's nothing the judge can do about it. But they're just losing sight when they've got a very confident and authoritative man like Silas Reed. He's a very good speaker, he's very articulate and confident. They can lose sight of the fact that they've got there will be no consequences whatever they decide about a case. There'll be no, and they can lose sight of that. And I realised that early on.
It was totally unrelated to climate, but it actually made me quite sick. I had a nervous breakdown as a result of an injustice, and when I look at that now, I think that's quite stupid, because it was about, sort of normal family things that happen, but it was an injustice. It sort of meted out by my parents across 4 siblings, and it caused a breakdown in relationships, and so that was really horrible for me, to have my own relationships affected with my siblings, or one in particular. And I recognised what injustice does to people. It made me ill. And the climate crisis is making people sick, and it's killing people. So in some sense you could say there is a connection, but it's the driving force is different, but the injustice is the key.
Got it.
And it made me very angry, and that anger I've transitioned it from within my family to a much more important and much less selfish and much more selfless area. And I think but I have asked myself, because I'm surrounded by friends who are doing nothing about this, frankly. Literally, they think it's enough to sort of change their cooker from a gas cooker, and of course that's really good. Right. But they sort of think, oh, Hannah's going to be really pleased with me. I've changed my cooker from a gas cooker, and I'm doing my job, or I've insulated the windows. Actually, I'm, in some ways more guilty of not doing those things, but I'm taking action against a system that is, going to kill billions, already killing millions, and will soon be killing billions of people.
That's some story.
Well, I think everybody. Yeah, it is an emotional. I think one has to be triggered by something emotional, probably.
Right.
Tony, I was present during, I was in the public gallery during the trial of Marcus and Morgan. That was a Just Stop Oil action where they scaled the QE2 bridge and they hung a banner for nearly 2 days and caused, significant disruption. During that trial, again, I pick up on what Tony said, which is the judge speaks with great authority, and this can be quite intimidating for a jury, I think. If you're a person who all your life is, like all of us, has obeyed the law, we respect authority, it's very difficult for a jury to feel confident enough to go against a judge's directives. And in the case of this trial, the judge seemed really reasonable throughout the whole trial, and then on the day that he had to start sentencing and give his directives to the jury, or summing up, he gave his sort of summing up to the jury, he actually gave really clear directions to the jury. He explained to them that since about 30 years ago, it was considered not appropriate for juries just to take their own decisions, and that the judge should give directives to a jury. And he did that in no uncertain terms. He absolutely, it was so obvious, he gave them very clear directives, which was that he felt that Marks and Morgan had caused massive disruption, they'd broken the law, and the obvious result of that was that the jury it felt like they were being given directives to give a guilty verdict. And this felt really unfair to me, and I didn't really understand why a judge should be allowed to give directives. What's the point of a jury if they're going to be told by the judge how they should, what decision they should come to?
I'm guessing you guys are all from all over England.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy down here is not from Scotland.
Okay. Really? That's a big old joke. No, great. Well, let's move it.
But the government are choosing to shut down Just Stop Oil, again because, as we've seen at COP28, the vested interests have got their clause in. They've got their clause in Parliament. They've got their clause into making new laws. It was a think tank that wrote the policy for the new Public Order Act. It wasn't the government that wrote that. They were handed it on a plate by Policy Exchange, which is a dark think tank funded by fossil fuels, a lobby group. So
back then, 400 years ago, people were prepared to stand up for their convictions.
This is an interesting. I have an answer for this. That I think they didn't have our captured media at that time, probably, and think life was more simple, and there was probably a stronger sense of moral conscience, possibly. We've let go of a lot of, if you look at, I watched a film last week about Robert Fisk, who was an incredible journalist, and he lived in the Middle East, in Beirut, for 40 years, and he talks about the Middle East, how they've held on to their religion, and this still is how they run their family lives in accordance to a very strong moral code. And in the West, we've lost that. And I'm not actually a religious person at all, so I'm not coming from the point of view of, I think it's, but it is a really interesting observation to see that how our society in the Western world has a combination of that, losing our sense of moral conscience possibly, and close-knit family, and a lot of those things that require people to think about their behaviours. And that combined with the modern media. I mean, if you read Noam Chomsky about, the propaganda, the Western media machine, it's run by billionaires who maintain their power by keeping everybody else, apart from their small elite, very wealthy elite, in a state of constant confusion and a state of, kind of hating each other, culture wars, division. So if you look at the media in the UK, it's built on this model, particularly the right-wing media. And I think that possibly, I don't think the public know. That's why these actions are so important. We're reminding the public of the jury's absolute right to acquit on their moral conscience. So even if the person has technically broken the law, in the eyes of the law, they can acquit them. So actually, I was told an interesting story today about children 200 years ago stealing loaves of bread. And this was the jury acquitted them. They were threatened with deportation to Australia. It's absolutely horrifying. Children stealing bread, obviously because they were starving. Why do children steal bread? So ordinary people take very sensible, morally based decisions and that's why our legal system has decided to have this system. And we're disrespecting that now. The judiciary, or some of it, is disrespecting that to a degree that is very, very concerning.
Saying that 400 years ago, 350 years ago, people were more willing to put their freedom where their conscience is. The judge sent those jurors to prison for 3 days without any food or water.
Yes.
Because they refused to convict the 2 Quaker preachers on trial. So, would that happen these days? I don't see it. I can't see it.
No, I can't see it. We have now, as it says on the Defend Our Juries website, we have trial by jury in appearance but not in reality, when prosecution can deem certain witness statements inadmissible, and judges can restrict what defendants say in front of the jury. I compare it with a murderer. A murderer on an indictment before a Crown Court. Of course they'd be able to speak about the mitigating factors about why they murdered the person. What suffering they'd gone on, whether true or not, what suffering had gone on at the hands of the person that they murdered, whether they were provoked or not. So I see it as very similar for climate protesters, that why were they motivated to do it? What inner suffering did they feel about the injustice going on, about governments, in my opinion, so obviously being controlled by vested interests, making laws and deciding to explore for new fossil fuels when the head of the United Nations has said it's moral and economic madness exploring for new fossil fuels. He said that a couple of years ago, Antonio Guterres. So, so that wouldn't happen now. On the surface, it seems more of a civilised time, that judges aren't going to actually put jurors in jail or threaten to do so. But they just do it by another way. They do it by not making it obvious, or even forbidding defendants to talk about jury, what do you call it? Jury equity, independence, right to make their own decision, restricting what can be said, blah blah blah. So it's still done. They're still controlled, these jurors, but by more surreptitious means. There's another point about under the old common law. You see, a judge in a case before a jury was the convener, right? The judge didn't have all the authority that they have now. He was just the convener, and the jury used to even be able to decide on a sentence as well.
Really? No,
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
and there was none of this. What do you call it? Preliminary directives about what can be said in front of juries. There was none of that in the past. So
What period are we talking about?
I got this from a documentary about the common law and judges and juries. When was it? I can't say off the top of my head.
Don't worry. So if I were to ask, if I were to say to you, well, if you're a glass half full mood, how would you feel about today? Or what would you say about how today went?
Oh, fine. To how today went, we did all we could, didn't we? And
Is that enough, though? I agree, we did all we could, but is that enough? I mean, it isn't enough, let's face it.
no,
Is my
there's a process going on. More and more people are waking up, but it's not quick enough. And what humanity is facing, according to the climate scientists, as I said, using words like near panic, deep sadness, gut-wrenching fear. That's another one that another climate scientist said about what he thinks. It seems it's too slow, and I think, what's it going to take for enough people to wake up? I've heard people in Just Stop Oil saying, oh well, at least a couple saying, oh well, what made me join it was July 2022 when we had 40 degrees centigrade in London, and not just London but a lot of England as well. I really thought I've got to get involved in activism now. So what's it going to take? Is it going to take another big weather event like that goes on for not just 1 or 2 days, but 1 or 2 weeks to wake people up, to join in activism? Of course, people are all subject to having repeated at them, we live in a democracy, and it's a fair system. And they get this repeated at them again and again, and when something is repeated at you again and again, subliminally, you eventually believe it. So the evidence of their senses, obvious signs of climate breakdown. Is it going to take another extreme weather event? Is it going to take Westminster needing to be flooded by the River Thames for a few days, completely flooded? I don't know. I wonder.
I think that as an action today on its own, if you took that just as a unique action, it's obviously not going to achieve very much. But it's it's doing the actions again and again. Tony and I both did this action outside the Old Bailey 10 days ago. On that day, 600 people across the whole of the UK sat outside Crown Courts with the same sign, reminding juries of their absolute right to acquit on their moral conscience. Now, this is an ongoing, a bit like the climate crisis. Is not a one act. It's an unfurling. It's an unraveling that is is happening before our very eyes. In the same way, our actions are we have to keep going and going, and we just hope more and more people. I really agree with Tony. I think that what is it going to take? That question. What is the tipping point where the public actually realise that all the other systems have failed us? The government is failing us. Democracy, so-called democracy. Democracy has been killed really by this government until people really recognise that that's the truth. They've done their best to kill it. I mean, literally, it's not just dead. It's been killed by them actively.
Yep.
Yeah.
So now, if you're in a glass half empty mood.
Well, yeah, it is difficult. I mean, I've been doing activism for the past 5 years, very intensely, every day, every single day of the year. I don't stop. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm also alongside people who've been doing it for 40 years, 50 years. Mm-hmm. And I look at them like Jonathan Porritt was with us last week outside the Old Bailey, and I look at him as a man. He's done everything in his power. He's in his 70s now, I think. Is he probably early 70s? Mm-hmm. How that must feel to carry that weight of failure, because he has failed and we have failed and we are failing. Mm-hmm. It's very, very hard to carry that. But I'm also very hopeful. Mm-hmm. So at the same time as recognising the level of failure, the failure is every day that we fail to shut down fossil fuels right now. Mm-hmm. And every day that we fail to do that, more people are dying. So I see it more instead of seeing it as a win or lose situation. Mm-hmm. It's very much a situation. It's an ongoing situation that we will keep fighting. And the day that we do, see fossil fuels literally being shut down, which is what's required, will be the day that we know that less people have died. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So it's about saving lives. It's just very sort of simple. Yep. It's exactly the same reason I marched for a free Palestine and for a ceasefire in Palestine. Is identical. It's about saving lives. Right. And the more we get out every day and we try and do that, the quicker I presume we're going to reach the results that will save lives.